Our world tends to reduce decisions down to only two options: this or that, staying or going, red or blue. But when we do that, we ignore the motivations behind those decisions. There's the action and what is behind the action, what you can see and what you can't see. We call these motivations values. Values work behind the scenes to motivate and guide every decision we make. These convictions about the way the world works steer every aspect of our lives. Values are hard to articulate, hard to recognize, because they're so ingrained in who we are. And yet they have more influence on our choices than anything else. Do your values reflect Christ? Do your decisions reflect your true values? Maybe instead of choosing this or that, one extreme or the other, maybe there's something greater Christ is leading you to see.
Hey, good morning, church. So, on Tuesday, October 3rd, 1995, practically everyone in America stopped what they were doing and gathered around a TV or a radio. The conclusion to one of the most riveting court cases dramas in modern American history was about to come to a close. I mean, everything came to a stop. People didn't work. They didn't go to class. They didn't make phone calls. I mean, I even read a story about airlines were delayed because passengers wouldn't board before they heard the verdict being read. Everything seemed to come to a screeching halt as 12 jurors decided the fate of one man. Finally, at 1 p.m., the jury found the football great O.J. Simpson not guilty on 2 counts of murder. You know, trials are interesting things. I mean, evidence is put forth, arguments are made, and testimony is heard. Then a decision based upon their understanding of the events must be made. What I found fascinating, even as a sophomore in high school at the time, was how divided people in America were over this verdict. I mean, do you remember that? I mean, we all heard the same evidence. We listened to the same testimony, but we all came to very different conclusions. Have you ever wondered how that happened? It happens because of one little word, and that word is values. You see, values are the compass by which you navigate through life. They are how you set your course and how you filter or the filter, rather, that shades everything you believe and the decisions you make. Values are what you base your life on and what you give your life for. Now, the question is, are your values a reflection of God's values or values that you picked up from the world? You see, that's such a difficult question to answer because it's hard to critique the waters in which we swim. But if you are a disciple of Jesus, you have no choice but to spend time answering that question, because that question will determine how you live your life. So, we as a church have values as well. We've spent a lot of time in prayer and reflection to come up with these convictions, and we're going to use them actually to guide every decision we make from this point forward. And that is exactly what this series is about. All right? So, without further ado, let's dive into value number 1. Our core value is we desire to be a church that embodies truth with grace. You see, in John 1:14, it says, "The Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. We have seen His glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." I mean, wow, what a powerful, powerful passage. I mean, what we see in this verse is that Jesus is the perfect combination of grace and truth. Notice, it wasn't an either or, grace or truth. Or it wasn't even half and half. He was half grace and half truth. It was a both and. He was all grace and all truth all the time. Jesus was all grace. He welcomed sinners and ate with tax collectors. He had compassion on the crowds and fed the masses. He welcomed the little children and healed the lepers, the lame, and the blind. Even with his dying breath, he saved the criminal that hung next to him on the cross. If you want to know what grace looks like, look no further than Jesus himself. But Jesus was also all truth. He condemned the hypocritical religious leaders of the day. He called all those who would be his disciples to take up their cross daily and follow him. He prophesied judgment on Jerusalem for their unrepentant hearts. He obeyed God's laws. He set standards, and he demanded everything from his followers, even their very lives. So, if you want to know what truth looks like, look no further than Jesus. You see, what's interesting is that we tend to gravitate towards one side or the other. Either we are truth people or we are grace people. So which one are you? Which side do you tend to gravitate towards more? You know, what I found fascinating in my short life is that grace people are so quick to give grace to others, but it seems like they have trouble giving grace to themselves. And truth people are so quick to condemn others and point out their sins, having no problem giving grace to themselves and overlooking their own faults. I don't know. It's just an observation that I've seen. So which one are you? Are you a grace person or a truth person? We as a church need to be full of both grace and truth if we're going to impact our world. To quote Jimmy Evans from his book Tipping Point, he says this: if you have truth without grace, then you are performing spiritual surgery without anesthesia. Or on the other hand, if you are full of grace but you neglect the truth, then you are dispensing a medicine bottle with no medicine in it to cure anyone. Only grace and truth together can bring about anyone's healing. You see, too often, many of us define love as either being nice or getting tough. We often try to balance those two responses to the point where it feels like we're walking on a tightrope. We think somehow that we need to be nice so that we can earn enough trust to give someone tough love. But that is not at all what Jesus did. Grace and truth were not techniques that he used, but instead postures that he inhabited. He is graciously truthful and truthfully gracious. So let me illustrate what I mean through what we will call the grace and truth matrix. Like I mentioned before, we have a tendency to gravitate towards one side or another. All right, so in this matrix, grace is going to be on the vertical axis and truth is going to be on the horizontal axis. Many of us are committed to truth, but there is very little grace. In this scenario, people are used so we can make a point. This is when we feel the need to call out what people are doing, regardless of the relational carnage that it causes. Unfortunately, we as Christians are attracted to this way of thinking. We feel that truth needs to be said at all costs, no matter the collateral damage it causes, because truth is truth and it needs to be said. But you see, the problem with this type of truth-telling is it's not Jesus' truth-telling. The reason I know this is because Jesus' truth-telling sets people free. And this type of truth-telling actually enslaves people to this sort of a rule-based righteousness or performance-driven spirituality that is driven by fear and guilt and shame. Or it actually sends people away into a state of hiding from God. I mean, there has to be another way, which leads us to the opposite extreme, where we show people high grace and low truth. In this scenario, people are appeased so we can be liked. And I'm afraid that we went from being a call-out church in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and now have become a hangout church in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. We are so concerned about being liked that we shrink back from the difficult topics and conversations. You know, it seems like in order to keep the peace, we settle for making people happy instead of calling them to obedience. We keep telling people that God loves them just the way they are, which is true, but never tell them that God expects them to grow, to change, and to transform. This is not the grace that Jesus offers, because the grace that Jesus offers empowers us for more. For some, the pendulum swing between grace and truth has just become too much, and they simply check out. Religion to them becomes a very inward thing, and people are pushed aside for their own self-preservation. They tend to retreat from the messiness of relationship and turn Christianity into something to be consumed for their own enjoyment, or something that will help them disconnect from the world or even medicate and numb the pains of our own lives. This is not the life Jesus had called you to. Grace and truth were meant to be shared, not hoarded and kept to ourselves. So, as we look at the life of Jesus, he didn't merely call out, hang out, or check out, but he called in. He had this beautiful way of calling us into relationship and responsibility. I mean, look at the woman caught in adultery. He made the accusers confront their own failings by saying, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." And then when they all left, he asked the woman, "Is there no one here to condemn you?" And she quietly answered, "No one, Lord." And he said these beautiful words. He said, "Then neither do I condemn you. Go and leave your life of sin." Notice he extended both grace, no condemnation, and truth when he told her to go and sin no more. Or another example is when Jesus heals the man that was born blind. I mean, the Pharisees completely missed the miracle because they are too busy trying to make a point. They don't care about this blind man. They only care about catching Jesus in a trap. But you see, Jesus is different. To the blind man, or the leper, or the bleeding woman, or the criminal on the cross, or the countless other people that Jesus interacted with, he showed them grace. He said this. He said, "I see you, I hear you, I am with you, I am glad you're here, you matter." And he showed them truth. He invites all of them to live in the reality that God made it to be. So here's something pretty amazing that I saw in the life of Jesus. In his life, grace always came before truth in the Gospels. We see it with the woman at the well in John 4, his interaction with Zacchaeus in Luke 19, the woman caught in adultery in John 8, and the list could go on and on and on. What he did is he reached out to meet a physical need and to create some relational connection before he spoke words of life into their souls. And our pattern as a church should be the same. If we speak truth disconnected from grace, we have everything to say, but likely no one to say it to. And if we exhaust ourselves showing grace, but never speak the message of truth, we may actually cultivate an audience, but in the end, have nothing of eternal value to say. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to close with a story that I think sums up what grace and truth looks like. And I found it in a very interesting place, actually in the top court of the land, the Supreme Court. You see, I read this story this last week about the late Judge Scalia and the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They were friends. They couldn't have been farther apart politically, yet they deeply cared for one another. It's reported actually that against all odds, the pair had a warm, decades-long friendship despite disagreeing on everything from same-sex marriage to gun rights. You see, when Judge Scalia was observed taking a bouquet of flowers to Ginsburg's office during one of her illnesses, someone actually challenged him for being so amicable to a person whose views he strongly opposed. Scalia responded in this way, and I love this. He said, "There are some things more important than votes." You see, that is an example of being full of grace and truth. So this morning, I don't know where you are in your life and what made you decide to tune in this morning, but I want you to know that you are dearly loved. We at the Georgetown Church of Christ, we see you, we hear you, we are with you, we are glad you are here, we are for you, you matter. God loves you just the way you are, but he loves you enough not to leave you that way. So if we can help you take your next step with Jesus, please let us know. You can actually text the word "next step" to 456-9806, and we will be in contact with you to help you on your journey. May God help us to be a church that embodies truth with grace. Be blessed.